Take a look at these poems from the 1910s by French poet and artist Guillaume Apollinaire. If you're wondering why they don't look too much like traditional poems, they aren't. In fact, Apollinaire referred to his creations as calligrams, and little would have known that these works would go on to influence the creation of a whole new literary movement, Surrealism. In fact, the word Surrealism can be traced back to Apollinaire himself, who coined the term when writing the program notes for Jean Cocteau's and Éric Satie's 1917 ballet Parade, a proto-surrealist ballet, if ever there was one. It is generally agreed upon that the first definition of surrealism was given by French poet André Breton in his Manifeste du Surréalisme, published in 1924. His manifesto outlines his belief that this new form of literature could unlock the subconscious to, quote, express the real process of thought, the dictation of thought, free from any control by reason and of any aesthetic or moral preoccupation. Yet, 2 weeks before the publishing of André Breton's manifesto, French-German poet Yvan Goll dismantled Breton's manifesto before it even released, publishing his journal Surrealist, in which he undermines the Freudian foundation of his surrealist peers, arguing that surrealists were confusing art and psychiatry and were just producing trivial work that wished to, quote, shock the public. According to André Breton, the first surrealist work of literature was the obscure and disturbing novel The Songs of Maldoror by the Uruguayan-born French writer Isidore Ducasse, published in 1869. Other surrealists also cited the poetry of Arthur Rimbaud as inspiration, specifically his 1873 work A Season in Hell, which begins with the lines, "Once, if I remember rightly, my life was a feast where all hearts opened and all wines flowed. One evening I sat beauty on my knees, and I found her bitter, and I reviled her. I armed myself against justice. I fled. O sorceresses, O misery, O hatred, it was to you my treasure was entrusted." Of course, many other novels from before the First World War could be viewed as surreal fiction. I look to Kafka's 1915 The Metamorphosis, for instance, that mixes surrealism with realism, telling the tale of Gregor Samsa, a traveling salesman who wakes up one morning as a large insect. At its core, the novel is absurdist, since the exploration of Gregor's dehumanized tragic existence is exposed through a surreal transformation. Still, after the trauma of World War I, surrealists paved a path to confront the post-war uncertainty of Europe, which they believed was caused by excessive rationality brought on by bourgeois values. André Breton went on to start a literary journal with poets Louis Aragon and Philippe Soupeau. The three began practicing automatic writing, a fancy way of saying that they were writing without any intention, without censoring their thoughts. The journal published these writings as well as accounts of each of their dreams. Breton and Soupeau eventually perfected their use of automatic writing, enough that they completed The Magnetic Fields from 1920, which is widely considered as the first major surrealist work. The early surrealist poet Antonin Artaud was mentioned with indifference in Breton's Surrealist Manifesto of 1924. The writer and actor published many poetic works such as Umbilical Limbo from 1925 and Nerve Scales from 1925. The beginning of one of his poems reads, "With me, God the dog and his tongue, like a dart, pierces the crust of the double-vaulted dome of the earth which itches him." In 1927, Artaud was expelled from the Surrealist circle by André Breton, a case that occurred to many other early Surrealists. Artaud was kicked out of the circle due to his political differences with Breton and others, who were aligning themselves with Marxism. In 1956, Artaud alluded to the conflict when he wrote, quote, "They believe that they can laugh at me when I write about a metamorphosis of the inner state of the soul, as if I had the same vile notion of the soul that they do." Published in 1926 came the semi-autobiographical novel Paris Peasant by Louis Aragon, which tells of his nighttime escapade with André Breton and Marcel Noël. Their trip to a park represents a sense of wonder and discovery, when the setting becomes a darkened place with darker associations. The tale features elements of le merveilleux quotidien, French for magical realism, as mundane scenes turn into surreal spectacles. André Breton's 1928 novel Nadja is arguably the most iconic work attributed to the Surrealist movement. Set in Paris in the 1920s, the novel begins with the line, "Who am I?" Nadja is semi-autobiographical as Breton drew heavily from his relationship with Léonard Camille Delacourt to write the novel. We follow André, who narrates his brief affair with the character Nadja. André becomes fascinated with her perspective on life and her rejection of authority, a perspective often associated with Surrealists. However, as André learns more of Nadja's emotional struggle, he begins to despise her humanity, preferring to view her as a mysterious and unique person. The narrative is linear but vague, never specifying if Nadja is a real woman or an illusion. Another avid user of automatic writing, the French writer Benjamin Perret, was also a central figure in the Surrealist movement. His poems can be read in the translated edition of Death to Pigs and other writings. France was also where the Iranian author Sadegh Hedayat began writing his 1937 work, The Blind Owl, while he studied in Paris. Written in Persian, the novel's narrator, who is in despair after the death of a lover, repeatedly confesses his dark secrets to the owl-like shadow on his wall. I could go on about the Surrealist writings that came out of this French movement, but I have to omit going into detail on many works due to their disturbing content. For example, Georges Bataille's unspeakably vulgar work from 1928, The Story of the Eye. Indeed, most Surrealist writers did not hold back on accurately representing depraved and immoral characters. Many argue that the first wave of Surrealist literature overlooked style as it simply wished to produce thrill and to express a different sense of the world. Ultimately, Surrealism's intention to create against the grain was successful. But, somewhat to their detriment, Surrealist writers seldom took into account how accessible their works would be to readers of the interwar period, who frankly just lost interest. Nonetheless, Surrealist literature never really died, as the latter half of the 20th century saw other authors experiment with the genre and making it their own, such as Anna Kavan's novel Ice from 1967, Leonora Carrington's 1974 novel The Hearing Trumpet, and Haruki Murakami's 1985 novel Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World.